Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Right, this is the annual chat between Philip Fisher and Richard Jordan in Edinburgh. We're on the second Monday of the Fringe and International Festival, which now run on the same dates. Welcome, Richard.
Hello, Philip. Nice to be back with you for it's amazing to think that a year's gone past again so quickly. And
it's incredible.
Another festival.
And you seem to be going from strength to strength. You're heading off to Chicago in a few days to launch what sounds possibly your most exciting venture ever.
Well, I don't know if it's our most exciting, but it's a digital show which is called Unpathed Waters, Undreamed Shores, which is all about the death of Shakespeare for Shakespeare 400. We're making it with Chicago Shakespeare Theatre, and it's actually a show that has a legacy back to the Edinburgh Fringe, because it comes from an Australian company that I discovered in Adelaide in 2008 called One Step at a Time Like This, who were doing a show called En Route, which was a on-the-streets version of, it was an on-the-streets version of creating a show for a city with its own soundtrack made by local musicians. And we did that with the Travis Theatre, and there during that Chicago Shakespeare Theatre, who I work with regularly, I got along to see the show, and we did a Chicago version of that, and that's led on to us doing 2 commissions with Chicago Shakespeare Theatre, and this is the second one of those, and it opens in the first week of September on Navy Pier, and hopefully, if it all goes well, it's using digital technology with mobile phone. We're making it with a company called Vermont, and it's using a new system called Beacons, which is a system that will actually transmit digital data into mobile phones. So I've not done very many digital shows, but it's a project that's quite interesting because it has the ability to run permanently. And Navy Pier, very big tourist attraction in America, but also a wonderful pier that of course goes right into Lake Michigan, where at the end you can find Chicago Shakespeare Theatre, because that's where it's built, is going to actually, it's just had this huge refurbishment, and the show is actually going to take audiences through that, as well as fusing Shakespearean culture within it.
It does sound exciting. Possibly less exciting this year, Edinburgh.
It's a strange year, isn't it? I mean, it seems to be a year of fits and starts. It may be that because you and I have been here so many times, our benchmark and our expectation grows every time we come, which of course, if you see a lot of theatre, it does the same, the same you see it. But it's strange. I have to say, I think the Edinburgh International Festival's work this year has been superb, actually.
It was last year as well. We were just talking about the Glass Menagerie, which is just exceptional. Directed by John Tiffany, a cast 3/4 come across from the States, led by Cherry Jones. And it's certainly the best Glass Menagerie I've ever seen.
Well, I had the pleasure of seeing that production in New York. The whole cast, other than Cherry Jones, is new. And I have to say, I think this cast is better than the New York cast I saw. Zachary Quinto, who you'll remember was in all the Star Trek movies and Heroes, Mr. Spock, and so on, was very good. But I actually have to say, I think Michael Esper, isn't it?
Yes.
I think he's fantastic, and it was a pleasure to spend 2 hours or so in that show. And it is one of the saddest plays ever written. I think in terms of the American canon, Glass Menagerie and Long Day's Journey into Night and Death of a Salesman are probably the saddest plays ever written in the American canon. And I think this production, the scenes between Laura and the Gentleman Caller, they
Laura
are
played by the one Brit, Cato Flynn. Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking and electric. And I mean, I think I can't recommend people enough if they can to get.
And at the moment, it's only meant to be playing for 2 weeks ever, and one just has the hope that it makes it maybe to London or feeds back into New York or whatever.
Oh, I hope it. It won't go back to New York. I think it's done its season, and I think probably Cherry Jones, who's a big US star, I think probably feels that she's done that. But we can but hope that it will go to London. I mean, look, wouldn't it be fantastic to see it somewhere like the Cottesloe Theatre or, not the Cottesloe, sorry, the Littleton Theatre, actually, because it would need to be on a bigger stage than that, or indeed into a West End house. I think it would be beautiful at somewhere like the Wyndham's Theatre or one of those places, and I'm sure that if anyone's savvy enough and she's available, that would be an obvious transfer. And also John Tiffany, now following Harry Potter, is sort of the headline director of the moment.
So here's hoping. Elsewhere, I saw Norma, the opera with Cecilia Bartoli, and that was just gorgeous. And it's nice to go and see both of those, some really proper theatre, proper productions in Edinburgh, because so much of the Fringe is ephemeral and small scale.
I didn't see that, but I went to see Barry Humphries and Meow Meow do their evening of Lost Berlin and cabaret songs, and that was joyous, and it's made me want to go back now and actually revisit some of the music that was there. I thought it was such a great evening.
It's inevitable when one starts talking about the International Festival, the next step to the Fringe is the Travis, which has kind of been a bridge between the two for many years. I think we're both agreed that it's not having a classic year, though. A couple of highlights for me. Diary of a Madman, which is going to the Gate in London, just seemed to be several steps above anything else there.
I thought Diary of a Madman was absolutely fantastic. I thought it's a really solid production. I mean, I think Christopher Hayden has got a really good hand with those sort of plays. I mean, he did a brilliant production of 12 Angry Men in London, of course, at the Garrick Theatre a few years ago. He's become a regular stalwart at the Travis over the last few years, and of course he's about to leave the Gate.
Yes.
It's interesting to see where he goes and what he does next. But the adaptation of that production, I thought was really great. I thought the cast were really, really very strong in it, and it was just a very pleasant hour and 50 minutes to sit watching that show. I thought it moved extremely, extremely well, and I would certainly say I hope it's going to be a hot ticket when it comes to the Gate.
I think it's inevitable. It's a case of whether it can go further than the Gate or not.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a potential for that to be able to tour UK and internationally very successfully if it's something that they wanted to do.
Otherwise, I like Greater Belfast, which I know you weren't as keen on, which was a kind of combination of storytelling or story of Belfast almost, and from a very personal point of view in music. I liked
a lot of it, and I think I came out learning a lesson about the Travis. Look, from my opinion, the Travis still is the great, or certainly one of the great Edinburgh venues. I think it's the hardest venue to do a show in. I've produced there a lot of times because there is such an expectation that you come in. And I think this is the thing about discovery and expectation, and I think sometimes the Travis is judged a little bit more harshly than some of the other venues because of that. I mean, look, it's the National Theatre of New Writing in Scotland. It's difficult to get that right every time if you're producing new writing. I think the secondary thing within that is therefore the audience is coming often saying, you're saying you're the best, show us what you've got. If you take a show, I don't know, like let's say Daffodils, for example, which I enjoyed very much.
Let me see, from New Zealand.
If Daffodils had perhaps been at the Rainy Hall in Assembly, or it had been in a Pleasance venue, it may have had a totally different critical reaction from some people because they would have discovered it in a different way and felt there was a different degree of ownership. Because it's not that audiences don't cross over, but there is a strange attitude. I mean, Daffodils, of course, so many people have compared to Midsummer, the David Gregg play. There's comparisons and there's not comparisons. I mean, it's the same with many things. But I think the other thing I've learned about the Travis, and it's a case in point, and I think Greater Belfast reflected that. I watched Greater Belfast at I think 4:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday.
And I saw it as a late night show.
I think it comes down to that rotation, which is wonderful because you can pick when you want to see something. But it does also affect when you watch a show or the reaction you have at different times. I mean, interestingly, I saw, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic, was Panty, the Irish drag artist whose show I saw at 10:30 a.m. in the morning on Saturday, and you saw it in the evening.
I think I also saw it early in the day, come to think about it.
And I felt that show stood up, whatever, because it was actually much more than a drag show. It was a story that I thought it was the most interesting and freshest show I've seen since Penny Arcade came and did Longer, which I was pleased to see it come back for another run here at the Fringe. And I felt that show had a real emotional arc to it, and I was very, very pleased to see that it was there at the Travis. However, again, coming back to the rotation, I think the time of day can greatly affect, and I think it's the same with your press performances. If you're doing something, that's a play that's a very darkly lit play, and you've come in after having maybe had dinner or lunch, and you've done, because the Travis Day is 5 shows in succession of all their press openings. You can suffer because of that.
The other thing they do is they open shows later in the festival. So they've got the breakfast season starting tomorrow, as we are, and I'm going to get the title wrong, but Revolt again. She said Revolt, which it's from here, but it's played in the States already.
Well, it's a Royal Shakespeare Company production.
Right, okay. So
and it's Alice Birch, fantastic playwright. I think that'll be one of the hot tickets at the Fringe, and absolutely...
I suppose, and partly it's only playing for half of the Fringe.
I think I think it's coming from the other place, or it's been in the other place, because I know the other places, of course, has just reopened with Erica Wyman doing that fantastic season of New Plays that have gone in there. So, look, my opinion is exactly the right theatre for the show to be playing, and I'm
just wonder why it didn't start at the beginning.
Well, I mean, you can say the same question to me about Big in Belgium. I mean, we've just changed 2 shows. We have a show that opens next week. The reason it's opening is because it's coming off another festival, and we wanted to bring that to Edinburgh this year, and its timing worked in the way that it worked. So there's many reasons why you sometimes do that, and scheduling in Edinburgh is a logistical nightmare at times.
Yeah, the other venue that has been extremely strong this year for everything I've seen is the Summerhall Roundabout, which is Payne's Plough, very strong new writing company, and there for me two fantastic shows playing at the same time on alternate days with the same cast. Growth by Luke Norris and Love, Lies and Taxidermy. One of them is a really deep and it's almost a comedy about testicular cancer, but it's also deep and meaningful. The other one, Love, Lies and Taxidermy, is a very typical Payne's Plough rom-com, but again with some hidden depths.
I mean, it's interesting. It's the same model I think they used, if I remember correctly, last year with their actors alternating between 2 plays. I thought Love, Lies and Taxidermy was absolutely terrific. Growth I've not seen, but I'm seeing during this coming week. I mean, Love, Lies and Taxidermy is a really good romp. I thought that the directing of that show, I thought they'd really started to get a feel of how to use the space and how to...
Well, George Perrin did similar things last year, so he's just developing...
But I think, it takes several goes to work out how it works, theatre in the round is always a challenge for the actor, because, of course, if you rip your trousers, you've got nowhere to hide. But I thought that it was really good. I actually think the Payne's Plough season, I liked Scorch very much indeed.
Scorch is an Irish play, a slightly odd Irish play, but again a solo, which is very meaningful.
Yeah, and dealing with the issue of transgender, which has been a very prevalent theme in Edinburgh over the last few years. I thought that was excellent. I went to a Ghost Quartet last night. I think biggest and probably best kept secret in Edinburgh is that, of course, that's Dave Malloy, who Dave Malloy wrote the piece Natasha Pierre and the Comet of 1812.
1812.
Yeah, I got it right.
Which played off Broadway and hasn't got Broadway eventually hasn't got to London yet.
It played off Broadway originally, then it moved to a tent on 44th Street where it played there very successfully, and now in October it opens with Josh Groban in the lead at the Imperial Theatre on Broadway. Right. So it's been quite a journey to get there. But of course, Dave Malloy, composer of the musical, and he's since then done a great musical at Lincoln Center 3, the Lincoln Center space, and I think is really one of the most interesting US composers to watch. Is in the show playing keyboard.
The best kept secret just stopped being best kept.
No, and actually I saw it last night. I think I had a fantastic hour and 5 minutes there, and I can thoroughly recommend for a little bit of late night enjoyment a trip over to see that if he's on to
catch that tonight. Yes, Johnny and the Baptist is fun as well.
Yeah, I've seen them before, and again. They know how to play that, but of course it's nice. I mean, every brilliant thing seems to now become like the stock classic. It's almost become the Woman in Black of the Edinburgh Fringe, that it keeps being able to keep coming back and selling out every time. And I think that's another thing about audiences that sometimes like the familiar. I think it's very interesting how repeat audiences will come back, and I wonder if that's also a situation now with Edinburgh with ticket price and even going into recession, that sometimes people like to pick those safe choices. I mean, there's a reason people go back and see the same comedian year in, year out.
It's that, and also on recommendation, if you're going somewhere and someone said this was good last year, you're a pretty safe bet rather than just picking something random.
Although it is
harder
with a lot of shows, of course, because it's very hard to get the press a second time to come and see you.
Yeah.
But with stand-up comedy, I think it's a slightly different bent. And of course, with Every Brilliant Thing, I think it's actually established itself as that fringe stalwart. Yeah. And I mean, look, the sold-out signs at the box office testify to that again.
Yeah, which is amazing. Elsewhere, lots of different things to talk about. Just a few shows at random to start with. Reduced Shakespeare have gone back to Shakespeare 35 years on with Shakespeare's first play, and they get it right. To me, not sure I've seen everything in between. I've certainly seen most of them, and they're just better at Shakespeare than anything else. And this is one of their best shows.
And of course, I'm going. Actually, it's one of my little secret treats for the end of the Fringe, because I think it was going to be great fun. And of course, I nearly booked the wrong show, because there's also a show called The Rough Guide to Shakespeare playing at Assembly, and of course, understandably, in the Shakespeare 400 year, we have that. I've not seen that yet, but I hope I'm also going to get to catch that as well.
That's definitely worthwhile.
My little sort of secret discovery is a show called Growing Pains at the Underbelly in the afternoon. It's on at 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's by a guy called Tom Gill, absolute unknown. It's a BAC commission. It's as raw as you can imagine, and visceral in all the right ways, but he's a young performance actor, writer and poet to watch. It's a very personal show about his life.
Solo show?
Solo show. He sings and performs in it as well. It's at the beginning of a journey, but I think someone who's really an interesting artist to watch. So I was really pleased to go in and make that discovery, because it was one of those things where I had a gap. You stumble in on an idle Sunday afternoon and you discover something that's a really great surprise.
My discovery of that type possibly is a show called Yolks Night, which is set in Ireland. It's very much like And the Water's Disco Pigs, but whatever, 15, 20 years on, written by somebody who either has or hasn't yet left East 15, and with it's a two-hander about this romp with a couple of Irish kids going mad, and it's just they've got it right. It's very special for new writing for new company, and strongly recommend it.
It's interesting, isn't it, though, when you think about...
and that's Pleasance Bunker.
Disco Pigs, and, I think there was a point after Disco Pigs happened. You have in the brochure, there were 3 or 4 companies that came back in subsequent years doing their own production of Disco Pigs, and I had to laugh the other day. I went, actually after I'd seen, I think, Growing Pains later that day at the Underbelly, I was flicking through the brochure, and suddenly I had to double take, because it suddenly said... a musical by John Godber, written and directed by John Godber. This is, of course, I say that because there was a time in the early 90s and you could not open the brochure without seeing about 6 productions of Bouncers or Shakers and all this shit going. And John Godber was a stalwart at the Fringe. When I first started coming in 1988 at the Assembly, it was where I saw Sweet Sorrow, I saw Bouncers, I saw Gargling with Jelly. My first 12th night ever was a production that was done by Hull Truck at Assembly, and he was a stalwart of those Fringe with those shows coming. And I actually went to see it, and it's a musical work, and it is indeed John Godber having directed it and written some songs for it. And I kind of said it's fascinating how there are still that older group of Ruby and the Vinyl. And it's just fascinating how those artists, they still keep coming back. I mean, they maybe not be quite as prevalent as once they were in some of those venues, but there is that fact of that reason that they keep returning. I mean, Ender, of course, really made his career actually going back to the Travis Disco Pigs. I remember it was a late night show in Travis too. I saw it, and you did. I think you went to it, and it was an amazing breakout. Oh my goodness! And then he came back, I think, after that with Bedbound, which was another equally powerful piece of theatre. And there's that question. Yes, you can still make it in Edinburgh. Can you still make it? I think you probably can. I think Edinburgh itself just morphs itself into different ways.
Casting around for 3 other Edinburgh shows, all of which are light-hearted and fun. I've been a big fan of the Big Bite Breakfast for donkey's years, and they've got a programme of 3 shows. They're all kind of 5 plays in an hour, 6 plays in an hour. Generally, at least 3 or 4 of them are good. Programme 2, I reckon, is the tightest this year, but they've also got a Big Bite Lunch, which is their very best shows over the last 10 years, and that one is really worth catching. 5 great little plays, very special. Life According to Saki. I'm a big fan of Saki, Hector Hugh Munro, writer from First World War era or before. It's set during the First World War, and it just feels a far more professional show than one sorry, it sounded really rude, one expect to see on the Fringe in the smaller venues. Recommend that. And lastly,
I think also just to say, I think the great thing about that is, and obviously a clearly also strategic plan with Edinburgh, it's sometimes quite hard to work out a time to eat. If you go there, you also get your breakfast served. So it's
Big Bite Breakfast, yes, not Saki, yes. a very nice croissant. I enjoyed that. And The Duke, which is Sean Dale Jones, who used to be Hugh Hughes of Hoi Polloi, but he's generated his own show. It's a man sitting at a desk, and he's just so good-hearted, and it's a fun story. It's just good storytelling, very witty. I know you've seen that.
I think the great thing about Sean is that Sean knows how to make theatre accessible, and you felt in that you had an enormous hug that was going around the room. And I think he is one of our great sort of, actor performers, floating, which in fact gets referred to.
Yes.
Those Hoi Polloi shows were great, and I think Yeah, it's bold because, I mean, Hugh Hughes was an absolutely extraordinary character that he created. It's one of the great Edinburgh characters to emerge and went all over the world. I think it's very bold then being Sean Sean on stage, and he does it with absolute aplomb, and I thought it was really great. And of course that show is also, just because it's a free performance, but there was a collection at the end
for Save the Children. Yes.
I thought it was a really great show. A little discovery I had, which was nice to see, was Grassmarket Project, a company I followed since the early days of the Grassmarket company, when they set up in the Grassmarket hostel in literally almost a few feet away from where we're talking this morning.
Indeed.
They came with them, I think, probably one of the rawest shows, using local homeless actors who'd come through the project and were sort of telling their story on stage. Not voyeuristic in any way. Anyway, they've carried on working, and this year they're back at Summerhall with a show called Doubting Thomas. Now, it's, again, a totally different way to Tom Gill's work. As raw as you can imagine, some of the most honest acting you will see on stage. The leading guy, Toshi, is quite remarkable, but there's also an older guy in the show. I don't know if he's ever acted before, but the truth in the way he plays those scenes was to me a pretty extraordinary hour in the theatre. Again, I at Summerhall, and again stumbled on it by chance in the Cairns Lecture Theatre. Had a gap at 7:30. Grassmarket Project, whose company I'd been interested in the past, and delighted to see again, and great to see them up here doing their work and continuing to really do some fantastic stuff.
It's lovely to infuse, and I think sometimes one also has to be aware that in Edinburgh it's possible to get big misses as well as hits. I don't think either of us necessarily want to name any, but for those who've not been up before or are coming up soon, it's worth being a little bit careful. Quite often, I think the words that I most dread in Edinburgh are free comedy. If someone's got a comedy show and they're not getting anyone to come into it and they have to give away the tickets, you really don't want to be there. You might just strike lucky, but the odds are about 30-1 against us, I think.
Although there is an interesting statistic in Edinburgh, isn't there, I think I've heard, which is that the average audience in Edinburgh is 3 people. So if you've got 15 people in your audience, there's 4 other shows at the same time playing to absolutely no one. So you can sort of understand. I mean, it's a very challenging festival. I mean, there's nearly 2,900 shows this year.
I was going to say about 3,000.
Just on the fringe, excluding the International Festival. And there's a population that increases in Edinburgh, but we're not talking about to the density of level that necessarily can sustain all these shows. I guess it's the same question that comes back every year. Has Edinburgh got too big? It probably has, yet the fact being that the Open Access Fringe Festival is something I believe absolutely passionately about. I mean, as you know, I'm the patron of the Brighton Fringe Festival in May each year, which is the 3rd largest fringe in the world. And again, I believe its success is through the fact that it's an open access festival. The strength of that is that the new fledgling company comes and stands side by side with the experienced one. Someone like yourself, writing and reviewing, actually sees those young emerging companies, and those people can come and actually have that content and that ability of that review. And I have to say, with Brexit and the way that we are heading, with recession and the cost of drama training and drama school training, the Fringe is, and I think I've said this before, maybe in a previous interview together, it's the single most important training ground, in my opinion, or it will continue to become for now and in the future. It's not just for those people on the stage, it's also for the backstage workers, the people who are working in those venues. Those are going to be the people who in 5-10 years' time, that person who sells you that ticket in the box office could be the person who's running the National Theatre. Yeah.
And just to finish, it's strange. Seen a few comedians, not a vast number, seen loads of shows, and Brexit is non-existent up here. It just isn't finding its way into anything yet, which surprised me, because it's a couple of months now since the vote. I would have thought comedians would at least have set some part of their set aside, but clearly they have them written so far in advance and they're so fixed they can't do it.
I mean, I understand it with theatre shows, because there's possibly that element that the dedeadline for Edinburgh was April.
No, that's fair enough.
So I think next year we might see a swathe of Brexit. Maybe it's just a situation that, a little like me, nobody quite really understands what's going on.
But
because
that's
it doesn't
the moment
seem like
when comedians can have fun.
I think that's true. I mean, maybe most of these comedians have already recorded their DVD, so they can't put new material into it, which of course is the thing now. I mean, look, Edinburgh used to be the place where you came and tried out material. Yeah. It was the place, and now actually, and I think that's the interesting problem with comedy, is that Edinburgh is a stopgap often on a national tour, or if you are a big headline comedian, you come and do 3 nights at the Playhouse. You don't necessarily play the Pleasance Grand for the whole festival. It's lovely to see Nina Conti, who has done that.
Absolutely.
But by the same token, or if you are the winner of the Foster Comedy Award or something, possibly the next year you come back, but you only play a very bijou 50-seat venue, sell that out, and on your poster you have 40 shows sold out at the Edinburgh Fringe, and it headlines you for elsewhere you're touring. So I think comedy, actually, oddly in Edinburgh, I actually think theatre's taking it back. There was a point some years ago where it became very hard to try and see a theatre show after 7 o'clock, and this year I think that is not the case. I have to say, I absolutely applaud people like Anthony at the Pleasance and places. I really think Anthony Olsen, has really taken theatre back, and I think there is a lot of really great theatre going on. And I think Summerhall coming in and creeping in, which really, apart from Robert Newman, has a policy of not really doing stand-up comedy, has actually put in a good content. And of course, the Travis, to speak about earlier, has always been a strong theatre place. And of course, they've then got the late night comedy play of Daniel Kitson, which is always going to delight some audiences.
We've got lots more to see, and you've got to rush to a show. I've got one slightly later. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed. That's great fun.
Thanks very much, Philip. See you next year.
Our Edinburgh panel discussion this year is impressive because it features the 3 leading Scottish theatre critics. So, very, very honoured to have Joyce McMillan, Mark Fisher and Neil Cooper joining me. I'm also impressed because I think for the first time ever in about 10 years of doing this, we've got someone with a genuine Scottish accent. So welcome, everyone.
That means.
That's you, definitely. What we're planning to talk about in detail are 3 plays: Anything That Gives Off Light in the Edinburgh International Festival, World Without Us at Summerhall, and Diary of a Madman at Travis, and then that will give us jumping off points to talk about lots of other things that are going on in the festival and Fringe this year. And we will also give you a few tips for shows to see if you're coming up to Edinburgh for the last week. So, probably a tired quartet by now. All of us have been rushing around for 2.5 weeks or more. So, first of all, Mark, you're going to talk to us about Anything That Gives Off Light.
Anything That Gives Off Light is playing at the Edinburgh International Conference Centre as part of the Edinburgh International Festival, and it is a co-production between the festival as well as the team from New York, Theatre of the Emerging American Moment, if I'm remembering correctly, and the National Theatre of Scotland. I think it's at least the second time that they've collaborated on a full production. They've also done some work. The 2 companies have done some workshops together as well. They did a show called Architecting a few years ago, which was a collaboration as well. The team specialising in sort of post-Worcester group, cross-cultural, post-that cross-referencing, and the National Theatre of Scotland being the sort of fluid body it is. I suppose there's quite a nice match there. And this is a sort of free-flowing play that is technically a road movie, which begins in a Scottish pub where a tourist on her honeymoon, although bizarrely without her husband, has arrived from America. She lives in West Virginia, and she arrives in a Scottish pub where she meets, and she's played by Jessica Almacy, and where she meets 2 Scottish friends, one of whom is exiled in London voluntarily, and the other one still lives in Scotland, and they take a road journey together, which is sort of a road journey into Scotland's past. So they go to the sites that are part of the language of Scottish cultural heritage, whether it's Culloden or various battles and the strife historically between the lowlands and the highlands, and the show begins to question the veracity of some of the stories that we tell ourselves from history, and then in a very typically teen way, it's directed by Rachel Chavkin, who's a big name in New York at the moment in her own right, as well as with her, she's better actually known with her work for the team in this country than she is in America, but she's doing amazing things on Broadway at the moment as well. The company is adept at merging history, politics, landscapes into each other, and so a journey back into Scottish history suddenly becomes a journey into the story of West Virginia and the way that capitalism has been exported in the form of the ideas of Adam Smith into American culture, and it sort of compares a lot of the tropes of American philosophy, the idea of the land, the idea of trespass, the idea of gun ownership being a sort of fundamental thing to American culture, comparing that to Scottish attitudes. And so it's a lot of jumping forward. It is a sort of bizarre sort of story because it jumps backwards and forwards from West Virginia and the mining communities there back to the history of Scotland. trying to make some sort of connection between where we are now, where we were then, and whether the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves are true. In particular, the idea of the underdog. Both America, USA, and Scotland sees itself as likes to portray itself as an underdog, and yet much of the evidence is that both people from Scotland and people from America are the opposite of underdogs. So there's a lot of intellectual ideas there. Whether they actually cohere into a meaningful drama is another question. I do think there's the weakness of the play is that there's a lot of ideas in there, many of which have been explored in plays such as The Cheviot, The Stag and the Black Oil, and a lot of plays about Scottish identity in the 1990s. So a lot of it seems kind of familiar, and I think also a lot of it seems undigested in terms that it presents it to us, but it doesn't necessarily dramatise it.
So to me it felt as if it needed another, I'll say, week or two, and maybe it was a longer period of development before it got to a final position where it could have been a much, much stronger work. But, Joyce?
Well, it certainly didn't need more time. I saw a sort of draft version of this thing 3 years ago, I think.
Really?
On the Fringe. Yes, and actually this was a lot better than the draft. I went in with very low expectations having seen that, because what they seemed to be doing in that sort of draft version way back then was playing around with some pretty boring Scottish stereotypes and not really doing much with them except expecting sort of weak laughter from the audience about them. This is much, much better, and I seem to be one of the few people, and maybe you've got 2 or 3 of the few people here who actually enjoyed this show. I love the way Rachel Chavkin uses theatre to lay out ideas. I don't go into her shows expecting a well-made play. I expect a torrent of ideas and imagery, and the more accurate and the more perceptive those ideas and images are, the happier I am. And I thought that while this probably wasn't their very best work, I thought this show actually did in a kind of awkward and lumpy and not superficially well-made way. It did actually push forward the discussion about not only about Scottish identity, but about the whole idea of identity in the modern world, and the particular relationship between Scotland and the New World, in inverted commas, as it used to be known. Because places like West Virginia, where this American character comes from, were so heavily settled by Scots that there was really very little representation of any other ethnic group there at one time, Scots and Irish. So, I thought it was an absolutely fascinating evening, and I also thought the music in it, which we shouldn't forget to mention, was pretty astonishing. It was a kind of mix of Apple, and you can probably talk more specifically about exactly what the music was doing, but they had a terrific 3-piece female band with a kind of slightly punk appearance, but doing everything from kind of Appalachian folk to the really quite sort of weird and cutting-edge pop songs, some of which didn't work, but others of which definitely did.
And one of whom was a piper.
Yes, and I also thought that the central interaction between the two characters, Brian and Ian, Brian, the one who's a successful middle manager in London, and Ian, the one who's stayed at home and is perceived as the more sort of chippy Scotsman. I thought that was exceedingly well observed by 2 of Scotland's leading young actors, Brian Ferguson and Sandy Grierson, who also co-wrote the piece. So what they were observing were a lot of the very subtle nuances of the way Scots inside Scotland and outside Scotland regard their identity. And in the Brian Ferguson character, it really put its finger on a thing that's often denied in Scottish history, which is the role of Scots in the kind of middle management of systems, which a lot of Scots fancy themselves as opposing. So, you got the whole of the NHS in England apparently sometimes being run by kind of bossy Scottish managers, and yet up here we all talk as if the privatisation and managerialisation of the NHS has absolutely nothing to do with Scotland at all. So I thought it put its finger on a lot of these issues in an extremely interesting way, and I'm actually quite disappointed at the reception it's had from some people. I think it was maybe a mistake to have a very jokey treatment of the Highland clearances in it, or a sort of absurdist treatment of the Highland clearances, because the parallel it makes between the Highland clearances and what's now happening to the landscape of Virginia with things like fracking and very aggressive coal extraction is actually a very powerful one. But they would need to handle the clearances in a slightly more serious way for that parallel to have its full impact. But apart from that, I thought it was a really enjoyable evening. It's not perfect, but Chavkin in this kind of work doesn't do perfect.
No, it's not perfect. That's not the point of the team to be perfect. It's this glorious mess from, well, not just Rachel Chavkin's head, but all, Sandy's and Brian's and Jessica. It's this glorious mess. But there's a wonderful doings to it. It's very interesting with with the team, because we're used to sort of pop art collages from America, which is this kind of riot of form and content, but putting it in a Scottish context, it comes across, and playing with cliche in the way that it does, it comes across as this wonderful doerness. It's like Sam Shepard rewritten by Private Fraser from Dad's Army or something. It's not perfect, but I think it's what the team do. I mean, I think if you didn't have a back catalogue of the team, you might think, what is this? But that's okay.
Although oddly, I think some of the stuff compared to some of the stuff that the team has done before, it was actually neater and tidier.
Well, yes. I mean, it's actually a very straightforward story.
And bizarrely, in the past, I've criticised the team for being too much all over the place because it didn't focus. So this one does focus, so it sort of matches that criticism. But in a way, I did also miss some of the kind of whatever it might be, multimedia interventions and so on.
Okay, let's move on. We
What
sort
to talk about with that one?
Indeed. We've begun to talk a little bit about Scottishness, and another play, though, in fact, directed by the Gates' Christopher Hayden and heading down to London once it leaves Edinburgh, is Diary of a Madman. Neil, do you want to talk us through that?
Okay, Diary of a Madman is it's an adaptation, a loose adaptation of the Gogol short story by Al Smith, and it's produced by the Gates. But it recontextualises it in contemporary South Queensferry, where the madman is the guy who paints the Forth Railway Bridge.
Fourth Railway Bridge.
Fourth Railway Bridge. And the classic joke about it's a permanent job. You're painting the Forth Railway Bridge, and he is sort of. It all seems a long time ago now. So let me get this straight. He has an apprentice, a student apprentice from Edinburgh University, who strikes up a relationship with the guy's daughter, but out of this comes a kind of comment on a sort of post-Brexit, post-Indie referendum environment in which the guy loses his plot and he becomes a caricature of Braveheart and takes on the world in that way.
And a very powerful performance from Liam Brennan in the central role.
Yeah, Liam won the Stage Award for the Best Male Performance, and I think that was well deserved because I thought he handled with great kind of passion and sensitivity what's actually quite a disappointing play in the end. It starts tremendously well. The setup of this situation in South Queensferry with this sort of middle-aged Scotsman who's got this sort of traditional job of painting the Forth Bridge, and this posh young English student who with all that sort of entails, and then the daughter and the daughter's friend. I mean, actually the strongest thing in the play is the banter between the daughter and the daughter's friend, who are a pair of kind of young modern Scotswomen who just take no snash from anyone, least of all a sort of posh young Englishman, or indeed an old Scotsman who's turned into Mel Gibson. Where I think the play makes a mistake, and if you look at Gogol, you can see exactly where the mistake is, because when Gogol's madman goes mad, he thinks, I think, that he's the King of Spain. In other words, he adopts a kind of exotic identity that's really nothing to do with him. Here, Al Smith thinks he's going to say something about Scottish identity and Scottish masculinity and Scottish nationalism by making his madman turn into Mel Gibson. And I think that's just a wrong turning, because it brings in questions about the nature of current Scottish nationalism that, frankly, I don't think the play understands very well. And it kind of makes a hash of this business and ends up like the sort of last scene of Macbeth, with the young Englishman representing kind of reason, modernity and science, and the Scotsman representing some kind of mad atavistic nationalism that can't really organise itself or indeed innovate on the technology of the Forth Bridge without the steadying voice of the Southerner, And so that kind of cliche is pretty disappointing as a sort of ending to this play. However, once that sort of madness is over, it does have an absolutely beautiful final scene where the hero has ended up in a mental hospital and his daughter goes to visit him, and that is beautifully written. But I think it's unfortunate that he chooses a kind of madness that has a political context that I don't think he understands very well.
It uses a metaphor of the Forth Road Bridge's layer of paint on paint upon paint, and suggesting that the parallel with that is that people in Scotland have told themselves story upon story upon story, and actually it's lost the sort of girders, if you like, the sort of rootedness of what those stories might once have meant. So the idea is people in terms of broader political thing, people holding on to some idea of the past which doesn't any longer speak to the present. And it just seems to me that that's a sort of very cloth-eared response to what's going on in Scotland now, what has gone on in the run-up to our Scottish referendum, and also really just rather offensive, because it seems to me to be offensive in two ways. One, offensive to people who might have voted independence, because it seems to be saying that you're therefore mad for voting independence, and secondly, offensive to people who are mentally ill, because it seems to be making the equation in the opposite direction, that mental illness is somehow a response
to do with your national culture and its tropes.
I got that. I mean, I thought it was more about fanaticism and about, in a kind of post-Brexit climate, the people who voted leave in that way. It's about that response about the voiceless. He didn't have any voice, so he clung on to this idea of a cliche of Braveheart and all the rest of it, and that's where I saw it.
Well, what will interest me, I think, going forwards is in a month's time or less, we will get the response of, I was about to say the British, that would really insulting, the London critics to it and the London audiences. And I'm just fascinated to see whether they pick up these nuances or whether their reaction is actually... The Englishman doesn't come across it especially well either. He seems a bit of an idiot. And just whether their reaction to it will be completely different to people up here.
They might see it as an insulting caricature of an English student, I think. Although he does represent a voice of reason. He actually behaves very well in an awkward situation with this student. So I think that would be a strange response. If that it's already had some very good reviews from some London critics. But I think the idea that Scotland is a place and Scottish nationalism is a place that is all about atavistic memory and the kind of madness that can go with that is really, really something that people should hesitate to say if they know anything about the recent history of Scottish politics, because it really hasn't been about that. It's been about a kind of Scottish modernity and post-modernity that has really led to the political situation that we're in at the moment. And I would much rather have Al Smith's insights into the current situation in England. I think we should read more plays like Jerusalem, which actually try to explore why England voted for Brexit. I don't think sticking Scottish nationalism in a kind of basket with various kinds of madness and sketching it out in sort of a couple of scenes towards the end of a play like this is a very responsible way of handling the subject.
He could be a character out of anything that gives off light in some way. You expect you could plonk him in there.
Yeah, but in anything that gives off light, he would have been contextualised and challenged in a completely different way.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. I think I can honestly say I'm now for something completely different. Mark, do you want to talk to us about World Without Us?
No,
Joyce, I apologise.
Joyce is going to.
I do apologise.
World Without Us. Well, I think it's quite important to mention this because looking out to the fringe, there beyond the Traverse, there's quite a lot of work this year which is very, very conscious of some sort of sense of looming apocalypse. We actually saw it in the official festival as well with Matthew Lenton's wonderful sort of twin shows, both of which have a kind of lighted room surrounded by a kind of looming darkness or chaos. And World Without Us is a brilliant piece from the company On True and Good from Belgium, who have been fantastic Fringe First winners for their work with young people in the past. But in this case, we're not looking at work with young people, we're looking at an absolutely beautiful sort of 80-minute monologue, which completely elides the approach to the end of the world that's taken, say, by Kieran Hurley in his very fine monologue Heads Up, which is about the actual moment in a city like Edinburgh or London where people realise that the world is actually coming to an end. There's something strange in the sine waves, as it were, and it happens. But this is a wonderful piece because it takes the imaginative leap of looking beyond that moment. It just assumes the sudden disappearance of the whole human race and then leads you out into this long kind of poetic vision of what the world would be like without us, with all our phones gradually falling silent and all our laptops running out of power and all our planes gradually dropping into the ocean, and then over the centuries our buildings beginning to crumble, nature taking over, and then eventually, of course, the whole thing is swallowed up by the sun. And it's the most amazing kind of poetic ecstasy about that kind of sort of terminal vision of the human race and then beyond the end of the human race. And it's just, it's presented with terrific Discretion. It's co-written and performed by, and I think there are two performers alternating. But I saw the wonderful Valentine Denens, who's one of the leading sort of writer-performers of Belgian theatre. It's just, very sort of gently lit, and he kind of moves around this single piece of set, which is an obelisk that might be like the remnant of an old, computer stick or something like that. And just absolutely exquisitely performed monologue, and it's like the centrepiece of this theme of apocalypse, which is kind of bubbling under a lot of Fringe shows.
What I liked about it was they seem to try and do everything wrong they can. So they dim the lights at one stage, let everyone go to sleep, and you stay awake. And it's just one person wandering around, not talking emphatically, just in a sort of gentle, quiet voice. And I can't remember her name, but the lady doing it, and it worked perfectly well. And it's just mesmerising, but it's very hard to explain why. It's just beautiful writing, and the themes are just so deep, and it's something no one's thought about before.
It's about humanity, it's about environment. I mean, what I took out of it at the end was that it was, in a way, a kind of hymn to the value of consciousness itself. It's like a sort of quantum piece of theatre, because some people have taken it as being a kind of hymn to how wonderful and lush and beautiful and naturally beautiful the earth would be without us. But at the same time, there's this constant sort of backbeat in it about how human consciousness and our ability to see and measure and describe things, kind of, it is the tree falling in the forest, that our consciousness is a vital part of what the universe is. And so without us, the whole idea of meaning wouldn't be there.
Mark?
I think there's a sort of audaciousness in the writing, because it starts off and you think, you get the idea, we're in this room and imagine that, some sort of apocalypse is hit. And you kind of think, well, what's going to happen next? But more and more just happens and happens and happens and happens, and it just pushes that idea and pushes it and pushes it, for the next 80 minutes. And so it's quite an intense, I wouldn't recommend anyone went to see it if they were feeling at all tired, because it's quite mesmeric in its kind of level of detail. And I suppose there's a slight feeling. I did consider recommending it to a friend of mine who's interested in carbon management and the future of the planet and so on. And then I thought, well, actually, he knows all this stuff already. I think it might just be confirming what from a political point of view, what people know. But I take Joyce's point as well, that I think one of the things about it is that actually I've suddenly thought of a connection that I hadn't made before, which is there's a lovely children's play called Mikey and Addie, which is being done by Andy Manley, revived also at Summerhall, which focuses on the problems of a young boy who gradually realizes that his father is not a spaceman, but is actually, has just left his mother, and there's quite a mundane reason for his departure, not that he's actually in space, but by bringing in the idea of space in that show, it puts the boy's problems into perspective, because it keeps on sort of jumping back and forth, or it frames the thing and the idea of the universe. And I think this show does the same sort of thing. It sort of says, hold on, we're not that important, let's have a little bit of perspective that the world is more than us, the universe is more than us. And I think that's quite healthy, both for our mental health and for our survival, to remind ourselves that we're not that important.
Let's move on. We've talked about three different, a festival and venues. The International Festival, for me, again, second year under Fergus Linehan, I think it's been very strong theatrically. I had a few allusions to other shows already. To me, The Glass Menagerie was by far the best production I've ever seen of that play, directed by John Tiffany. It just worked perfectly.
Yeah, well, I went 5 stars on it, mainly because of Cherry Jo. I mean, there are aspects of the production which are beautiful, which kind of use kind of magical appearance of characters. There was a thing which I didn't have space to mention in my written review, which was that there's a feature of that set which you simply can't see from the stalls at the King's. You have to go upstairs to the balcony, to the circle, and look to see the way the different rooms of the apartment in St Louis are actually like little islands in this kind of black lagoon, which is a wonderful feature of the set that you just can't see from the stalls at all. But I thought her central performance, leaving aside every other aspect of the production, was a kind of 5-star event. She was so brilliant at capturing the idea. Cherry Jones, capturing the idea that Amanda, it really is not this fragile southern flower, that she has this huge heroic strength. And I don't think I've ever seen a production that without departing from the text at all, makes you so aware of the impact of that long economic depression on the lives of all those characters. You know, Amanda can hardly earn anything at all. She's trying to sell magazine subscriptions and a catalogue. Tom can't make a fulfilling life in the city where he was born or where he's grown up. And above all, the gentleman caller who left high school with such high hopes is actually stuck in a pretty boring job in a warehouse and is having to take evening classes to have any chance of progressing. And that's what that depression has done to all of those characters, and of course has left the most vulnerable character of all, Tom's sister Laura, without any prospects whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the political dimensions that you mentioned, but the personal dimensions as well. I don't think I've ever seen a production where there's so much love on stage. It's normally, well, you know, you see it, and Amanda is presented as a harridan, and Tom is a brat wanting to get away, and there's a real disharmony there. Here, they're totally dysfunctional and they're messed up, but the arguments, it's part of an everyday thing, and you really see the love there. And it's like, you know, that's just what happens in families, and I just thought it was amazing.
So Les Mark disagrees. I think we've got 100%.
I don't find it quite as revelatory as everybody else. Maybe my expectations are very high because, you know, there's some quote from the New York Times, if you read the review from Broadway, saying it's completely revelatory or something. And it is a very, very good play, and this is a very, very good production of it. I mean, that's not by no means a criticism. You know, I wasn't completely revolutionised by it, but maybe I was expecting too much from that point of view.
Anything else?
I just wanted to say as a footnote to that Out on the Fringe, and not getting the audiences it deserves, is Katie Dollitz's wonderful Georgian production of A Streetcar Named Desire, which actually it's at the Assembly Roxy, and it actually takes a very similar attitude to the central character, Blanche Dubois, you know, portraying her as a woman who's actually been through a hell of a lot and has survived things that most people couldn't have survived, and is still fighting for her sister, who she thinks has got into this dreadful sort of violent relationship, and, you know, certainly externally, she's not wrong in that judgment. So, you know, there's it's got surtitles, it is in Georgian, but it's a magnificent performance, and it was actually the production of the year in Georgia last year, and it looks fantastic. It's got this lovely jazz score, which is kind of reflected in shadow play of a jazz bar across the street. It's really gorgeous. If anybody's got time to go and have a look at that, it's around about lunchtime. It's a sort of early afternoon.
The Travis season, I think generally it's not been especially well received. There have been some very good things. My favourites, other than Diary of a Madman, have been two of the breakfast plays, which are on extremely early in the morning.
Two of the breakfast plays were very well, in fact.
And one by Steph Smith, one by Tim Price. I just thought were exceptional. The theme is on technology and how it's going to destroy our lives.
Tear us apart.
And those two I just thought were exceptional. I really hope they either get developed or get different slots in
I love
the
the Rob Drummond one, the conversation between the slightly drunk middle-aged Scotsman and the chatbot. Keith Fleming and Gemma McElhinney were fantastic in that. I really loved those. The Travers kind of bet the farm on this brand new play Milk, which has actually had very mixed responses. I think some audiences have been enjoying it very much, and it has some lovely performances and great imagery in it. But I think as a very first play by a brand new writer called Ross Dunsmore, and I think the way the imagery and the drama work together it hasn't been quite right enough for it to become one of the hits of the festival, which is a shame, but you know, it was still a beautiful production. There's been a bit of a sensation on the Fringe in the Summerhall programme, which is
I was going to move us on to Summerhall, yes.
And one of the things that they have, although they're showing it at the King's Hall just next door, is a Ukrainian-Canadian show called Counting Sheep, which Mark actually saw in Toronto before the festival, and that is an amazing event where they actually recreate the Euromaidan revolution of the winter of 2013-14 in the centre of Kiev on the floor of the King's Hall. So you go in there and you sit on your little benches thinking you're going to watch a show, and within minutes they've come to take your benches away to build the barricades and kind of suck you into the action. And it's actually a very immersive experience. I mean, for somebody older like me, it makes you realise how much revolution is a young person's game, and you know how in that kind of extreme situation you would just have to sit back and not eat any of the food because you're not doing any of what's happening, you know. But it's tremendous. It's a real challenge to the kind of individualistic, I'm out for a good night out attitude that a lot of the audience, because it's appealing to a very young audience, come in with, and it sucks you into this political crisis in which, you know, over 100 people died, so it wasn't without real risk. And that's a very exciting show that's been attracting a lot of attention.
Joyce and I were involved in the Fringe First ceremony and from the Scotsman, and I was Counting Sheep is one of the first week's winners, and I was talking to Mark, who's Marchick, who's one of the co-creators of it, and he was saying that he really liked going to the Fringe. I haven't told you this, Joyce. He liked the Fringe first ceremony because Joyce, as she always does, spoke very, very powerfully and passionately about the shows that were winning that week, and all of them were about something. They were all very, very serious issues, and he said that just because of his Fringe going at the start of the festival, he'd seen a little bit too much trivial stuff, and so he was heartened to know that there was sort of serious stuff out there. But one of the things about Counting Sheep, although it's tremendously viscerally enjoyable on that kind of sensory sort of way, and the music. Joyce hasn't really mentioned the music, but
the music.
There's no words in this show. There's sort of the written words, but no spoken words. But this fantastic Ukrainian music, very, very deeply rooted in 1,000 years of Ukrainian culture.
Lemon Bucket Orchestra,
the Lemon Bucket Orchestra. In fact, I wrote it down what they are. They describe themselves. The Lemon Bucket Orchestra describes itself as a Balkan klezmer gypsy party. I can't read that word. Super band.
Well, that's interesting that you gave it a Fringe first, and it's not actually written.
That's right.
And that's great.
No, Fringe first is for great new work that has a clear narrative and meaning behind it. It's not purely abstract. So yes, it certainly fell into that category, and it was really, really exciting. And another thing I'd just like to say, Philip, about this Fringe is that there is a huge new wave of really interesting female anger going on in the Fringe. That 40 years after the second wave feminist revolution, I think we now have a generation of young female artists who are incredulous and furious at the levels.
Do you want to name a couple
that women are that women are still facing? One of the most lively shows at the Traverse, I think, and attracting a lot of attention, is Adura Onashile's Expensive Shit, which is about it's about two things really. It's about this dreadful incident of this club toilet in Glasgow, which turned out to have one-way mirrors through which certain gentlemen clients who were paying a premium price could watch the women while they were at the wash hand basins in the ladies' toilets. And the other story is about the origin of the toilet attendant, a Nigerian woman, and her youth in the kind of republic of so-called freedom set up by the great Nigerian singer Fela Kuti, in which women were routinely expected just to service the needs of Kuti himself and of the leading men in the group. So it's about two different faces of very, very abusive patriarchy experienced through this woman's life and expressed. I mean, the whole show's a bit of a mess. It's the first play that Adura Onashile has tried to write for more than one character, and it's a very ambitious debut, and I would say a slightly more successful one than Milk. It really has a fantastic female energy behind it. 4 terrific performances from this woman and her three clients or her 3 friends back in the Nigerian
There's also
scenes.
a lot about women's attitude to masculinity, which you see in Rash Dash's two-man show. I saw a show called Joan last night, which is actually not about. Well, this is, I suppose, is a woman. It's a sort of, if you like, a lesbian queer cabaret version of the Joan of Arc story. So it's reclaiming that story as a gay story, I suppose. And then another show called Blush, which is about a personal video that's gone viral. Photographs have gone viral.
And of course, at the Traverse, we've also got Revolt, She Said, Revolt Again, which ends up with a rousing call just to eliminate men completely. And at the very beginning of the festival, I think we all saw a show called The Interference, which was a very powerful kind of semi-documentary style piece by the students of Pepperdine, Scotland, who come over from the US to Scotland every summer to do a project written by the Scottish-based playwright Linda Radley. And that was a very, very sort of strong semi-documentary piece about a date rape incident, which really, covered all the bases on that kind of subject. So it was.
And then there is Lucy McCormick, Triple Threat.
I haven't seen that one.
Which is a remarkable. It's so hard to describe, because I was describing it to someone the other night, and that sounds awful. And it does. They're in Lucy McCormick, Triple Threat. It's like a retelling of a nativity, but done with kind of high-energy camp music numbers, 2 gay angels in pants, and a lot of, let's just say it takes a very liberal attitude to what constitutes stigmata. And but it's unmissable. With the energy on stage, it's incredible.
Okay, let's just pick a few favourites to finish off. So does anyone want to start? Have anyone got anything left to talk about?
I think I've mentioned all my favourites now.
I'll throw in just one, which is back in the Edinburgh International Festival, a gorgeous show by Corinne Polbert called Wind Resistance,
Yes.
which is
I haven't seen that
music
yet, but it's
theatre hybrid, stories from the Midlothian countryside, themes of migration, the migration of geese, and maybe the migration of people, but it's also so very, very rooted in the landscape and the politics of how we engage with the land and the politics of teamwork, I suppose. She describes the geese as like socialists in action, or airborne socialists or something, and I think it's just so gorgeously, musically and soundscape-wise presented.
Yeah, and that's an interesting production from a Scottish theatre point of view, because it's part of the International Festival. It's appearing at the Lyceum Theatre Studio in Grindley Street, but it's scripted by David Gregg, and it's also billed as the very first production of his very first season as artistic director.
Which is going to be exciting for all of us.
Letters to Windsor House, which I saw the other day, which is Ship Theatre, that's the name of the company. And Letters to Windsor House, it's about two real-life flatmates who discover that they go through all the mail sent to previous tenants, and it's like a detective story finding out who they are. But en route to that, they discover that they're actually staying in a council flat, which is being sublet to them illegally. And it makes all these hugely entertaining, but really quite profound comments on the housing crisis and gentrification and all the rest of it. But it's also about friendship as well. There's a lovely kind of thing about friendship, and I think it's great.
Yeah, the housing crisis is bubbling under as well. There's another great show called E15, which was here last year but has come back to great acclaim, which deals with that too. Okay,
and I'm going to finish off with Summerhall Roundabout. For me, has just been the venue. Just almost everything there has been fantastic. There were two shows alternating days, same cast, same time. One of which is called Growth and is a comedy about testicular cancer, if you can believe that. And the second of which is called something
Love, Lies and
Taxidermy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've seen that.
Which is a glorious rom-com, very much a George Perrin style thing, Payne's Plough director, and it's just great fun. And lots of other things in that venue have been great. So I think let's stop now because we've all got things to go to. Thank you very much, Joyce McMillan, Mark Fisher, Neil Cooper. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.